All right. Well, thank you all for coming to our first webinar of the year. Today we are going to be talking about traffic gardens, and we have Fionnuala Quinn with Discover Traffic Gardens here to chat with us. Um, Today we will have Fionnuala do her presentation for us, and then we will also be talking about the ODOT pilot program. Nora will be presenting on that. Then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion, and then we'll move on to some statewide announcements. So please, I'm sure there'll be a lot of great conversation about the traffic gardens, but if we can keep questions kind of towards the end so we can get through all of the information today, that would be great.
And you're welcome to add questions at any point to the chat, and I'll be tracking them throughout.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Yeah, so without further ado, I think I'd like to introduce everyone to Fionnuala. Fionnuala Quinn is the director of Discover Traffic Gardens. Comes from a background in civil engineering, and is considered to be a prominent national expert on traffic gardens. So we're very excited to have her here chatting with us today. So with that, Fionnuala, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks very much. I'm delighted to be here today talking about my favorite topic. So next. So just so we're, all on the same page as to what a traffic garden is, it's basically a miniature, usually a closed network of streets. That's a scaled down version and a very simplified version of our traffic world, and with the intention of creating this little safe place to practice skills, have fun, learn about safety, lots of different things. But they come in many different forms, but this is sort of the basics. Next. The idea originated in Mansfield, Ohio in 1937. Sometimes people think it's a new idea, but it's not. A patrol officer, he made this miniature traffic world. It fits the definition. You can see he painted on the surface, and he made little buildings, signals, signs, and it was an instant sensation. DOT officials came down from Washington, AAA, because they were very interested in this idea. And it spread mostly in the Ohio area, but it went beyond that. Next. I am an alum of one of these small worlds. This is Clontarf Traffic School in Dublin in the 1970s, and we absolutely loved it. We were brought here. Now, we were children who already got ourselves around everywhere independently, but here we were learning roadway safety. So it was an idea that then had spread from Ohio out basically all across the world. So subsequently, I went to engineering school. I came to the US. Next. And through the course of my work, I was working on bike and pedestrian topics. I ended up in Portsmouth Safety Town, Virginia. And I instantly recognized this as being exactly the same thing I'd been to as a child. You know, this small set of streets, there was a classroom. In this case, it was police officers, as mine had been, providing instruction. So I knew like there were two. But then once I pursued it, I realized there were lots of these. They had been all over the US, and many of them had been operating like Portsmouth since the 1970s, operating continuously, but sort of operating in their own local world, beloved locally, but not really part of anything bigger, and they weren't really being looked at in any meaningful way. Next. So I said that started an odyssey, and I have found so far over 330 locations that meet my definition in North America, so including Canada. And I've been to many of these. I go when I can to see them, and they're all different. And if you go to my website, trafficgardens.com, you can see this map. You can drill in on it to find these locations. And I now also have a global map, so I have about 1,200 maps so far, but I've found hundreds more that we're trying to locate to put on the map. So it was an idea that was already out there. Next. So you can take a look at the map. You can see the installations in the Oregon area. And I use the map myself to go visit facilities, like if I'm traveling or if, I want to see. But I do also really love when people update me because I just collect this information. So if you know of anything, if you see anything that needs to be updated, this is sort of crowdsourced. Next. So these small worlds are being used for all sorts of different things. Like I said, I was already a kid that kind of got myself around. But often nowadays they're being used more for actually teaching biking skills, as well as roadway safety. And they can be used at different ages. It really depends on what people want to impart, what sort of programs they want to create or to facilitate. Next. So they're very much a place where kids can begin to get those feelings of independence and build their confidence on a bike, using the street. The kind of thing that, through my upbringing, we got through using the streets and getting around, which are not really experiences that a lot of kids have now. So this is a starter place to learn those ideas and gain those skills. Next. They are fun. Kids are just drawn to them. Like they see them, they know right away, this is a place where they can have a good time. You don't have to explain to a child what it's for. And if you think about how children play, they play with miniatures, they play with small scale worlds. Play is learning. This is how we learn early lessons. And one thing I like about this photo is the child in the bike on the right. She has she's carrying a baby on the back of her bike. And if you look in the background of the photo, there's an adult with a child on the back of their bike. Children are modeling the world that they're going to live in, or that they do live in this small space. Next. So we are currently in a revival of traffic gardens that's been going for almost more than 10 years now, but is really starting to take off. And in that revival, they've been slightly reformed and reshaped. And I kind of touched on that a bit. They were often in the domain of police and roadway safety, where they've come back in a slightly different way through the bike and pedestrian design and safety world. Next. So what precipitated the revival? Well, they had been big in the 60s and 70s. There had been an organization called National Safety Town, but once that organization kind of went away, they no longer were getting support, and they had kind of disappeared from general, awareness. But in 2009, there was a federal study that came out about a trip to Europe, and in the back, a bunch of officials went to Europe, and in that report, there was a case study about a traffic garden in Switzerland, and there were recommendations in the report saying, "Oh, we should use these for safety education in the U.S." And at the time, there didn't seem to be an awareness that they were already in the US under this different name. But now they had been reintroduced under this new name, Traffic Gardens, and they'd gone to a different audience. This report went to the bike and pedestrian design world, who were very taken by it. And meanwhile, street films then, so the idea was reintroduced under a new name. Street films made several videos, which were incredibly popular, about other traffic gardens in Europe. So there was a lot of kind of buzz about the idea. And a number of people were trying to get traffic gardens off the ground. And then actually Alta Planning supported this traffic garden at White Center in Seattle that appeared in 2015. And that was a sensation. To this day, I get photos from people of that site saying, "I want to do this." And in part, what was happening was, at the time, we were also using a lot of these more vibrant surface applied products that would not have been available in the past. So we had these bright colors, these much better materials, and could create these small worlds. Next. So there's different types, there's lots of different types of traffic gardens, but they can be broadly split into permanent traffic gardens where they are actual physical streets. You know, they might have curbs. That was the type that I showed that I went to as a child. These are very beloved. That's like the Portsmouth facility. And then there's the other type, which is a surface applied representation of a set of streets. And that's like the Seattle 2015 model, you know, these brightly colored materials that we can put on hard surfaces and create this illusion of streets. Now, the type on the right, these actual little streets, I mean, they're wonderful. Every child loves being in these little worlds, but those are very expensive. You know, that's actual construction, needing permits, real design, taking many years. And I have to say, nobody seems to have successfully put one together in the last like 15 years or so. There are and have been some attempts, and they would be wonderful. I would love that. Instead, almost all of the new traffic gardens are of this surface applied type. And that's something that, you know, you're not digging into the surface. That's pretty straightforward to put in place. Next. So this is just further elaboration. You can see the people working there. They are applying these great products, very vibrant, that last, like, you know, these particular products last probably a decade, and it looks really good. This is a former basketball court, but now it looks like a little world of streets. Next. So I've just touched on the idea of courts and transforming them. That's the other thing that's happening. Rather than building these new sets of streets, people are mostly repurposing existing hard surfaces. And we have a lot of them. They're all around the place. And often they don't look so great. But the big money was putting them in place in the first place. You know, getting all the layers of stone that are under that very shabby court, and leveling it out and getting that in place. But we sometimes leave them behind. We build a better basketball court, which is what this was, over very close by. They don't look great. We overlook them. But in actual fact, we have lots of products to, you know, it takes a little bit of money, but not relatively not a lot, to fix that up, either resurface it or recode it. And suddenly you have a blank palette to create this new traffic garden world. Next. So the typical type of hard surfaces, the most common ones that we're seeing are parking lots. We have a lot of them, and we actually don't use them all. School playgrounds, again, a lot of schools have hard surface around them. Basketball courts, again, we appear to rebuild our basketball courts. Often, you know, they slightly shift to a new location. Tennis courts, right now, an awful lot of them are becoming pickleball, but there's a lot of them around because tennis was on the decline for a long time there. We also have roller hockey rinks. We have all these hard surfaces around. So this is typically what people are using in their community. Next. Here's an example of a parking lot. And this is at the back of a recreation center in Colorado. You can see they didn't do any construction. They worked with the form that was there, and they actually they used this occasionally for big events, which was part of how they got to use it. And you can see they made all these little separate zones with different lessons, you know, so they very much designed it to the space. And one of the amazing things about this one also is they have a set of YouTube lessons online that go with each of those little spaces. They have them in both English and Spanish. So you can see where people are really, you know, creating these interesting things based on what they have. Next. Another way we're now getting a lot of traffic gardens is through the rebuilding or modernization of schools. In our big school systems, we regularly rebuild a few every year. And in some places, namely Seattle, DC, and some other places, as part of that rebuilding, a traffic garden is incorporated into the layout. And often schools are reducing their asphalt during this time, but there's still room to add this with other things. And you'll see in that picture, there's a little basketball they're called keys, so you can still use it for basketball. You can see the foursquare on in the internal spaces, and you can see other things like they have a little bus stop and they have a park and paths going through it. So there's a lot of like features for play as well as for using these for PE lessons in the school. Next. They can be fit in small spaces. They're flexible. This was quite a small site. Again, it was a school site, so you're seeing the Foursquare incorporated. You're also seeing some local features. That's a very accurate representation of the King Street train station in Seattle. But it also has the essentials for learning in the case of their programs, you know, yield intersection, stop intersection, and that outside loop that you can essentially bike forever on. Next. This was a great project because this is in Vancouver, Washington. It's just over the river from Portland. It's very close by. This is a big site that's being redeveloped. There's plans for this urban revitalization for the site. And in the meantime, the huge site is just sitting closed off with chain link fence, and then someone had the great idea to make it into a traffic garden for about 3 years. One of the things I love when I look at this photo is those kids are riding through the drive-through bank. If you look closely, you can see the two little islands for the drive-through bank. And in the case of that project, they brought in artists. You know, they have these 3D installations that are part of it. They've got a path going through. With a story that's about the ecology of the area. Again, very personalized. This project happened in record time. It was on the ground probably about 4 months after the first conversation about this idea. So next. They can be very flexible in terms of space. You know, once you meet certain guidelines, like, you know, buffers from surrounding things, street widths, they can fit into spaces that you have. In the case of this one, this is at a recreation facility. They really wanted to build a traffic garden. They were looking for a site. The recreation center is on a trail, so it was a great location. And someone realized, oh, there's basically negative space around the basketball courts, that it was wide enough to put streets. And then they just sort of pieced it all together. And it's been a very successful traffic garden for programs and has gone on to inspire a whole lot of other traffic gardens in that area. And that's another feature of these. Once one goes in, there's often a clustering of them in that area once the first project happens. Next. Often they're joint efforts. In the case, this is a school next to a recreation center that had a playground. So part of what you're looking at here is the red asphalt is the school playground. That black asphalt is the recreation center playground area. It was designed as a single traffic garden, but though that fence, there's a gate that closes off, so it can be used in multiple ways. I'm standing on the playground, taking that photo. So it's this very much multi-use, lots of partners sort of project that often happens and often seems to really facilitate these projects taking place. Next. A little hard to see, but in the far corner on the top right, there's a playground. This court was right next to the playground, sitting vacant. Nobody could remember what it had even been built for. It's in the heart of a neighborhood, again, on a trail. And it has been this huge success. It's always full of families when I go there, and grandparents, and actually the paint that was used was actually not of very high quality, so it's much more faded than this at this time, and yet everyone still loves it. It's still very in great use and very beloved. Next. Sometimes I don't want to not acknowledge that sometimes people do build a new pad purpose built for the site. I've been involved in a few of those. This is not one of my projects, but this is a great one in Michigan. It's 100 by 100 feet, you know, the site, then that gives you enough elbow room to add a lot of features. I love the design of this site. It has lots of little learning areas. It's wider than a lot of sites. A lot of sites are a bit inclined to be narrow, like the courts are narrow. This one It's purpose-built. It's a beautiful site. Next. And of course, the traffic garden, it doesn't work just as lines on a surface. And that isn't really, you really need to have a purpose and programs. And they work best when there's either programs that it's supporting or to facilitate programs you'd like to do in the future and by being activated. And there's just no shortage of ways to do that. Next. They are often paired with PE programs. We're seeing a lot more biking in schools, inside of schools. It's relatively new. In the case of DC, where this traffic garden is located, the second graders get 7 to 8 lessons to learn how to bike. But the last lesson is they go on a 5 to 7 mile on-street ride to a community destination. It's one thing to teach a 8-year-old how to bike. It's a totally different thing for an 8-year-old to know what to do at a stop intersection and when they start again, and all those other skills they need to know to take part in the community ride. And actually, part of how they conduct their PE program is for students who may not reach the level of skill that they go out on the community ride. Some of them stay in the traffic garden and they have a challenge within the traffic garden. So then they're all achieving in different ways. Next. They work really well paired with school programs. This is Seattle, where they have biking at multiple levels. They start with balance bikes, and then they go through upper elementary with pedal bikes, and they're now starting to think about traffic gardens for middle school. So they're paired with the biking program, and these school systems have very established sets of lessons already in place, and then the traffic gardens have been designed to work with those programs. But increasingly, I think we'll probably see the two go together as more schools are taking on biking, which is a big discussion right now in a lot of places. Next. There are many places where disadvantaged schools have put in a traffic garden, sometimes first in the community, to great fanfare. And really, people are delighted to have this new facility that they're proud of. Aton Elementary School, the PE teacher told me that this was the first thing kids would tell anybody who came to the school. We have a traffic garden. They're very visible. They're a very visible asset in a community, and they're still, pretty infrequent. So they're often something that you can show off. Next. They are sometimes being added within communities. This was a little closed off parking lot next to a tot lot. A bike advocate approached the homeowners association, and again in relatively short time, because relatively this was not a very expensive project for the homeowners association, they had this traffic garden in place, and it now has a beautiful sign. It has sitting areas. One of the things, my favorite story with this traffic garden was the first Christmas after it was installed. The bike advocate got in touch to say that the traffic garden was full of small children with wheeled devices. They all automatically came there to test them out. Next. And they are not just a thing for cities. They're really being found all over, because often they're tied to a local organization or champions who bring them to the community. Castle Rock is a small-ish town in Washington. Somebody who was biking down the West Coast stumbled upon it and sent me this photo of this, very nice traffic garden in the community. I love this sign for lots of reasons. It's very welcoming. It tells you, I learned a whole lot about who did the project from the sign. And then it's also serving as instructional education for people who just come to the traffic garden. When you're not programming it, a lot of people still use it. It may be families bringing their kids, and you're giving them some instruction on how to use it. And there are many ways to do that, but I think this is a great example. Next. So Nora will talk more about some of what we've been doing on the project for ODOT. But as part of the ongoing project, we did look at 3 particular communities. We're calling them case examples. And this is Olympia, Thurston County, Washington, who we interviewed. There's been a lot very interesting happening there regarding traffic gardens. This particular images of their 5th traffic garden. There's a partnership where they learned about traffic gardens in a webinar like this, and went home, did their first pop-ups, decided it was made more sense to do a permanent. They've now done 5 permanent traffic gardens in schools. They have a mobile traffic garden kit in a trailer that's absolutely beautiful that goes to the schools that do not have traffic gardens. They have plans to add a lot more traffic gardens in the area, and they are expanding out into rural communities. So that has happened in a relatively, well, short space of time, I would say less than 5 years. And they've learned a lot with each traffic garden, and they have a guide online for Washington State that they also created. So you can see that learning, and you can see them expanding it throughout the community in a very interesting way, kind of like I mentioned in the Charlotte example. Next. This was another example that we interviewed. We got a lot of information from Fort Collins, and I was lucky enough to be able to visit this one finally earlier this year. It dates from 2017. I'd always admired it because it has so much learning built into it. And it is designed, it's an adult scaled traffic garden, because most of what we've looked at has been designed for younger users, but they don't have to be. It depends on what type of programs you want to run. In this case, it's mostly middle school programs, but they also scaled it for adult learners. And you can see all the different lessons built into the traffic garden. So they also helped us on the project. Next. Dayton, Kentucky, an example of a small town that had been very depressed, is on the up, very much so. And this is one of the projects they did. They got a national grant. They have gotten tremendous media coverage from this particular project. It's for a school that's close by, and they are now like helping other people. Dayton, Kentucky is very close to Cincinnati, and they have helped that 3 more traffic gardens have been added very close by. They have been conducting tours for mayors groups and all sorts of people to just as this is introduced as an idea to the community. And they helped us also on the project. Next. So I've kind of touched on they can be integrated with all sorts of other play features. That top left photo, which is a little blurry, that's a traffic garden inside 2 basketball courts, which I went to see. A little unusual. And then you have traffic garden around basketball courts. You have Foursquare, you have games. Again, it is a flexible concept, and sometimes people want to do other things in the space also. So there's some great examples of, people handling that in different ways. Next. And, one of the things in this sort of new resurgence of traffic gardens is you're no longer doing projects from scratch. People were like back in 2015, each project was being developed completely from the ground up. But now you don't need to do that. There's guidance. You can go by traffic garden stencil sets that are sized for traffic gardens. You can get tips. You can get various program materials. There's a lot more, and there's a lot more emerging in real time as we go, as people are conducting new projects. Next. And I think I've hinted at this. These projects are very much the result of partnerships. It's usually people, they're already working in their community. They already have built a whole lot of relationships. Somebody has the idea to do a traffic garden, and then all of that is leveraged into this new project, which is introduced. Everybody jumps in and helps out. And they're very much about collaborative efforts in communities. Next. And this is just an example of the various different people that I have seen on what I now call the Traffic Garden Dream Team, because it's always like a team. And it's people, you know, with all different types of backgrounds. Like sometimes it's the people who know about the site, the facilities teams, or they own the site. And sometimes it's biking people, sometimes it's the street design world, people interested in children, children's safety, all working together, usually with established relationships, not always, sometimes all sorts of new relationships are made through traffic gardens. Next. And because there hasn't been in the, you know, in recent times, established funding streams for traffic gardens, people have been going out and getting the funds in different ways. They're usually supplementing it with some other sorts of funds, perhaps local budget funds. But people have been getting grants, again, from the same kind of different places, like the health world, the street design world, the safety world, the play world, private foundations, and they're making their projects happen through this sort of funding. Next. So far I've talked about traffic gardens in terms of teaching biking skills or roadway safety education, but they're also a chance to introduce the idea that our world is a designed place, and that how we design our streets affects how we use them, that they can be designed in different ways, and that they can be improved. So there have been quite a few projects and programs, and there's STEM kits now available, where this small world, which children can get their mind around, is expressed in different sort of STEM lessons. Next. And there have been quite a few projects where children, sometimes hundreds of children, have been invited into the design process, because again, it's an idea that they can get their mind around, it's for them. And of course, if we invite them in and we take their ideas, we really need to consider them in the final design. And in many cases, you know, children's efforts have been acknowledged at the ribbon cutting stage, and, you know, very much introduces it in a different way to the community. Next. Again, the design ideas aren't just for young children. They can be expressed to older students as STEM design. And in my experience, often they haven't been talked to much about how we design our streets, and they often get quite excited. They often have a lot they would like to say about how this should work. So they lend themselves to teen learning also. Next. There are other aspects. These are sort of the last bits of the idea. Often portable or small scale traffic signs are a key part of the traffic garden. Now, some of those images you saw, the signs were stenciled on the surface, and sometimes you can have both. You can have them stenciled and you can have portable sets. The sets, they definitely enhance it, but then it does get you into topics like you need storage, you need to be able to move them around. They're fairly heavy because you don't want them to blow over. But those are the sort of things that we now have guidance on. So, you know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on that topic either. Next. Now, the people who install these painted traffic gardens typically come from like the parking lot striping world, the roadway striping world, the the sports court installation world, and sometimes muralists. And they all have different skills and different types of equipment in terms of how they add paint to a surface. But the end result is, you know, they can paint a traffic garden on the surface. And again, there are a lot more installers with experience now, and we have a lot more direction and things to help them in that process. And many installers, excuse me, love these projects because they have all the skills and they have never done anything like this, and they get a lot of attention for, you know, these beautiful new worlds that they put in place. Next. I mentioned the stencils. They've been a real game changer because you just buy them off the shelf now. These are professional grade, so they're useful for your installation, but also for touch up later. But they can also be used like for pop-up events. Next. I also mentioned the welcome signs, but again, they've really had an upgrade, and a lot of facilities now have very attractive welcome signs that acknowledge who did the work, make people feel welcome, and say, you know, the few bits of rules that you have, like, you know, related to the installation. But there are quite a few great examples now. Next. Always the best day. I say never miss having a launch or a ribbon cutting event. And when I look at this, I see like the head of Safe Routes to School. I see research professors. I see principal, the head of PE. I see one of the children involved, or a couple of the children who were involved in the design process. Very much everyone proud of putting this together, everybody interested in what these are for. Next. And just, you know, a traffic garden ribbon cutting is the thing that can kind of help you get through the project. Looking forward to it. It's always a great day and a wonderful just event for the community. Next. So other aspects of traffic gardens that are emerging is designing for adaptive equipment. It's sort of early days. We have a lot of like sort of programs around the country, but it's just kind of new, designing a traffic garden for adaptive equipment, because frequently, you know, it's all different types of equipment. The Seattle Traffic Garden Guide has more information on this, and there's really great opportunity here, because again, it's a small world where we can provide lessons in sort of a very controlled way, so there's great potential there. Next. And another thing that's really emerging, but very exciting, and I'm actually hoping this will be a big year, is once we sort of gathered all the information about these installations that are out there and kind of put them under this umbrella term of traffic gardens, that information could be used by universities. So Penn State has done a big research project that we're just waiting to have published, where they got in touch with everybody off the map, and then conducted in-depth interviews. George Mason has research coming out about from looking at children using traffic gardens, and there are other projects in progress. So this is very exciting, because we'll finally begin to understand what's going on inside the traffic gardens, which we really didn't before, because we just didn't look at them that way. Next. So that's kind of just a brief overview. This is me. I have a newsletter, it comes out every 2 months, so you can sign up on the website, and you can always get in touch. So great, thank you. Oh, I've run over time a little bit, sorry.
No, that's okay. We're going to move on into Nora talking about the traffic garden pilot from ODOT.
Okay, so I'll keep this brief so that we have time for Q&A, but I just wanted to say that another part, besides educating you all about what traffic gardens are and how exciting and beautiful and what an opportunity they are, another purpose of this webinar is to launch the Oregon Safe Routes to School Traffic Garden pilot. So we have a call for interest that I'll send the link at the end of the webinar, and Indigo will also send it out in the chat. It's a survey. So I'll just tell you kind of like the very basics of what this program is, and then the interest form also explains a lot more. So we will be supporting 3 communities around the state in developing traffic gardens. So Fionnuala will be involved in this process as well. And 2 of those traffic gardens will be surface applied. So if you remember, Fionnuala mentioned earlier, the surface applied traffic gardens are paint or spray paint. So they do not involve actual like curb, sidewalk infrastructure. So there will be 2 planning, design, and installation of surface applied traffic gardens. And then in one community, we'll be doing a design and cost estimates for a more permanent traffic garden. So that might include some built environment infrastructure, but we won't actually be installing that or funding it. That will be more of like a design process. Next slide. So in terms of eligibility, and this is all included in the interest form, not too much is needed from the beginning. So you really don't need to have like any kind of momentum around this topic already. We're going to help you get started. But you do need to have a site identified that is smooth, level, free of cracks, or you have a plan to remediate the site. You also need to be willing to coordinate along with us 4 virtual meetings and attend an in-person site visit where we'll look at the site and talk about design options, and then be able to support the installation process. In terms of scoring criteria, so you'll see this outlined on the interest form as well, but we're looking at those site conditions. We're looking at community readiness. So this doesn't mean that you have to have done anything about traffic gardens already, but just that you have support from the school or Parks and Rec, or depending on where the site is. And then equity need, so just wanting to prioritize communities of need as well. Next slide. In terms of requirements for preparing the site, you'll need to work with us to prepare a plan and timeline for installing the project. You'll be supporting the installation process, providing some of the equipment needed for installation. We will provide the marking paint and spray chalk, but most schools have a striper, and so we'll be relying on schools for that, but we'll provide stencils and other materials. And then if there's any repair work or resurfacing, that's something that we're not able to provide on our end. So that would be the expectation of the community. Cleaning the site before applying materials and testing products in advance to make sure that the paints or the chalk is compatible with the surface. Next slide. Okay, so timeline, we're opening up the call for interest today, and then we'll be accepting applications through February 14th. So that's about 3 weeks. And then we'll be doing interviews with potential pilot communities the week of February 17th. And kind of, I guess what's not listed in here is like establishing the who's in that project management team, selecting communities in March. And then throughout the spring and the summer, we'll be planning, designing, and then installing the traffic gardens late in the summer, like before the start of the next school year. And then September, collecting data and lessons learned. So real quick, I see a question in here from Sarah about, oh, and Mary Jo, such a nice offer, thank you. Does it have to be at a school? No. If it should, so one of the site requirements is that it is located in a place where students frequent. So it could be a park, it could be some other community space, it could be a parking lot close to a school. You'll just need to have the support of the site owner, whoever that is. So I think we can open it up. Oh, okay. Another question about the pilot, and then we can open it up more broadly for questions for Fionnuala as well, if you have general traffic garden questions. But I see Michael has a question here. If using chalk paint, are these considered temporary only? That would actually be a good question for Fionnuala. Fionnuala, do you have thoughts on Michael's question? The temporary nature of chalk paint.
One of the things is sort of looking very carefully at the product that you're purchasing and the words on there. Spray chalk paint, spray chalk, you know, nice quality spray chalk will last weeks, maybe longer, depending on the weather, but not much longer. Sometimes people then respray because the hard work is the marking and measuring, finding where to put those lines in the first place. So sometimes people maintain it, although it's not, spray chalk is not cheap. There are other spray chalk products that say spray marking chalk, and they stay a lot longer on the surface. And then again, a little bit, it depends on weathering. It's very hard to put a date on, but definitely longer. Anything that says marking on it stays a lot longer on asphalt. And then there's marking paint, the kind of stuff that your utility company comes and marks up your street, you know, all different colors. That's marking paint. Again, that is not a permanent product. That can stay on a lot longer. And you know, we can talk about length for each of those. There's a lot of unknowns, but they do work differently. It's a lot of work to mark and measure, so it's, you know, the longer the product can stay on, sometimes the better. So a little bit general, but I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. And I want to go back to a question Mary Jo had earlier about just requesting some information on the freestanding road signs. And so I think those were like stop signs, yield signs that were on the posts. Do you have any information, Fionnuala,
Sure.
on those?
Drop me an email.
Okay.
I have a matrix where I've collected everything that's out there is quite what we want, because it's either short because it's aimed at the preschool market, or it's too heavy because it's aimed at the parking lot market. So sometimes what people do is put something together in between to kind of custom it. But all of that is in the spreadsheet, including those comments and stuff like that. People kind of successfully put it together.
Okay. So is it okay if I drop your email in the chat for, okay, so Mary Jo, feel free to reach out to Fionnuala there. And then Becky had a question earlier too, which maybe has been addressed to some degree about planning considerations for adaptive bikes in traffic gardens. So Becky, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to your question.
Well, Becky's question was, in thinking about scale, are there planning considerations for adaptive bike strikes, which would need a lot more room for maneuver? The answer is yes. And there was nowhere to go to find this out. But as part of a project we did for Seattle, the Seattle Traffic Garden Guide, which is online, it's on my website, it's on the Seattle sites. Because they use a lot of different adaptive equipment in the school system that's supplied by Outdoors for All, I worked with Outdoors for All, who went out in the field, especially for us for that project, to figure out the turning radii and the maneuver, you know, some information about the maneuverability of the different devices. And we have a chart in the Seattle guide that's pretty unique, because we laid it out there. And some of the devices really have huge, absolutely huge turning radii. Anyone who's worked with them will realize that. So we also have some suggestions on how to handle that. Like perhaps add features along the edge, add roundabouts around the outside edges that, you know, where you can have sort of the true experience of being in the roundabout. Because sometimes these are small and there just isn't enough room, but your edges may offer opportunity. But yeah, that is the one and only place to go to get more detailed information. And hopefully we'll build upon that, because this is an emerging discussion.
Indigo, I'll pass it to you to facilitate the rest of the Q&A, and then.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions for Fionnuala? Feel free to either put it in the chat or raise your hand.
Hi, this is Shane. I have a quick question. Someone mentioned the chalk paint. Is that what the pilot project is using, or which material, or is it dependent on what the site decides what material will be used for the pilot?
Nora, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Fionnuala, you can add as well if I'm, yeah, if you have anything to add, but yeah, those specifics will be worked out in the planning and design phase. So yeah, it's not necessarily definitely chalk paint, but it will be some kind of surface applied type of paint.
And since it's a pilot project, is it meant to be like a temporary thing that is removed after, or could the pilot be that it is a permanent, we're using, you know, materials that are long lasting, and even
Yeah,
though
I
it's
think
okay,
our funding supports the planning and the design for the surface applied, and then the cost estimates and the design for the permanent. But if your community had other funds that you wanted to supplement with, or like other sources for purchasing materials like the freestanding signs or things like that, that's totally an option. And yeah, we're kind of doing this pilot to see how it goes, see, gather some lessons learned, and hopefully there will be funding for more of these in the future.
And so just to confirm, based on what you said, that there's funding for the surface applied of design and implementation, but there's also funding for planning for a permanent, not surface applied, but if we're actually looking at curb and gutter and full build out.
For one, just one community gets
one
that
community
kind
gets
of
that,
like
and
more extensive, but just the planning parts.
just the planning part.
And then, yeah, 2 communities get the installation of the more temporary kind.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just mention in the chat, I see Fernando's Martinez is here. He was very involved in the Finnegan Park Traffic Garden in Texas. So that's always worth taking a look at. And it's a great example for lots of reasons, and there's information online. And one of its features is it's designed for adult bikes and adult trikes, but they use it for all different types of programs in the community.
All right, well, if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll also be sending out a follow-up email with all of the resources and information that we've gone over today. So that'll come out in the next day or two. So look for that. But if that's all the questions for now, we can move on to some announcements right before we wrap up here. So some upcoming things, we've got the Winter Walk Day is coming up quick on February 5th. We're asking folks to put in their orders for incentives by the 29th of January to make sure that you get them in time for Winter Walk Day. We also have in February, our webinar is going to be on walking school buses, and we'll be having a few folks coming to talk about the walking school buses that they've been running, different tips and tricks, things like that. That's going to be on February 28th. And we've got the link to register on our website. We'll also send that out in the follow-up email. We have the OATS, the Oregon Active Transportation Summit, is going to be April 23rd through the 25th. We will be having the Safe Routes to School annual meeting then. So stay tuned for more details on that as we plan that. There's also a call for proposals if you would like to speak at OATS. That's open through February 24th or February 14th, excuse me. We have the high school Safe Routes to School sticker contest is accepting submissions through February 28th. We have information on our website about the requirements for the stickers that are being submitted. We'll send that out in the follow-up email. And then lastly, we have the high school task force application deadline coming up on the 14th of February. I know we sent out some information in the newsletter and then to hubs about the task force application for high school students to join. And so we'll send more information out about that too, so you can pass it along to high schools that might be interested. And with this last minute here, Fernando, do you want to talk about some of these photos that you're putting in the chat? They're all really great.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, I had some issues with the microphone. Yes, so this is sort of Finnegan Park Traffic Garden, which is The first one of its kind in Texas is very large. We took half of the parking lot on a cul-de-sac to make it available for all ages to have the opportunity to learn about bike safety. We're partnering with nonprofit organizations. We have an elementary school across the street, a very dense community, low-income community across the street, and then we have a high school next to it. So this park connects to a trail. It's about a mile and a half trail, and connects to this traffic garden. So when the kids learn how to ride a bike, they can have the opportunity to go into the park trail, or even take them out to a community ride. We have done that. We actually had the training for e-bikes, which a lot of people haven't done that yet. So we use this traffic garden to do e-bike training for adults and kids. We have a fleet of bikes. We purchase bicycles from WOM. So WOM bicycles are in Austin. So we got maybe about 200 bikes, and we're purchasing more to have them available, because there is not enough bicycles for all these kids that will come to this site. And then we have a container, 20-foot container that store all the signage, bikes and tricycles there, helmets including. So we just open the trailer, the container, and then we're in business for the teaching kids. So it's very neat. We're working on our second traffic garden at Tom Bass Park. Still under design, construction hasn't happened yet. But this is a good example that when you want to do something, you just do it. Don't think about it, because if you think about it, you find a lot of barriers that you don't make it happen. So this is 100% funded through the Harris County Precinct 1, Commissioner O'Neill's office. So thanks to his leadership, he approved and we made investment to make this happen.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing all those photos. That was great. Well, with that, thank you all for being here. Special thank you to Fionnuala for all of her insight. And we will see you next month for our February webinar. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for a great presentation.